The will contained exactly one codicil that mattered, and Sir Reginald Fenwick had read it 3 times over the course of a single restless afternoon, without once truly absorbing what it said. This is not as uncommon as you might think. I have sat by this fire a long time, and I have found that people, particularly fathers who have already decided how the world is arranged, have a remarkable talent for reading the words directly in front of them and seeing only the conclusion they arrived at before they began. Sir Reginald Fenwick was neither a stupid man nor, in the ordinary run of things, a particularly dishonest one. He was simply a man who had spent 28 years sorting his household into categories he had settled on early and had never found cause to revisit. He had 2 daughters. Clara was 28, plain-spoken, practical, the one who kept the estate accounts and organized the charitable school in the old mill house on the edge of the property, and had spent the better part of 6 years making sure the Fenwick household ran with a quiet efficiency that everyone benefited from and no one particularly noticed. Diana was 24. Genuinely lovely, socially at ease, the daughter Sir Reginald had presented in society with the particular pride of a man displaying his most valuable piece of property. He loved them both. He simply had a clear sense, or believed he did, of which one the world would pay for. The codicil in question had been written into the will of the late Earl of Blackmore, the uncle of one Viscount Weston Caldwell, and its terms were these: the Ashvale coal lands, a tract of perhaps 800 acres sitting precisely between the Fenwick estate and the Blackmore holdings, would pass to whichever Miss Fenwick married the new Viscount within the calendar year. Without that transfer, the lands would revert to a distant cousin of the Fenwick line, a man known principally for his enthusiasm for selling things. The late Earl had wished to see the lands stay whole, and he had wished, for reasons of his own that we will come to see his nephew married to a woman of particular character, and so he had written Clara's name into the document. Not the elder Miss Fenwick in the general courtesy sense, but Clara, her full Christian name, the one the old Earl had learned through a years-long correspondence with the Ashvale charitable school she ran, to which he had been a quiet and regular donor. Sir Reginald had read past the name 3 times without seeing it, because, in his considered opinion, the Viscount of Blackmore was a wealthy, titled and eligible man, and wealthy, titled, eligible men chose the daughter who looked like Diana. He did not, therefore, mention any of the particulars to Clara. He did not, in truth, mention the proposed marriage to Clara at all. He informed Diana, and he set the household to preparing for the Viscount's visit, and he went to bed that night satisfied that the natural order of things was in the process of asserting itself. Clara knew something was coming. She always did. She had kept her father's correspondence in order for 6 years, and the letters from the Blackmore solicitors were not subtle. She had read the codicil herself, standing alone in the estate office on a grey Wednesday morning, and she had seen her own name in the old Earl's careful handwriting, and she had stood there for a long moment, understanding precisely what it meant, and precisely why her father had not mentioned it to her. She went back to the account books. She did not tell anyone what she had read. She ordered the guest rooms aired and the linens pressed, and the kitchen informed of the Viscount's expected preferences, and she did all of this with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, and she did not, even in the long privacy of her evenings alone in the estate office, permit herself to wonder for very long what it might mean to be the daughter someone actually came to find. She was the load-bearing wall. Diana was the wallpaper. Nobody, in Clara's experience, had ever come to a house specifically for the load-bearing wall, however much the house depended on it. Now, my dear friends, I want to tell you about Viscount Weston Caldwell, because he matters to this story in ways that go beyond the obvious, and I will not do him the discourtesy of reducing him to a type. He was 34. He had inherited the Blackmore title and its attendant complications 3 years prior, when his uncle died and left him 3 estates, a considerable reputation to uphold, and an income that was, on paper, impressive, and in practice, deeply encumbered by the kinds of expenditures his late uncle had made in good faith over a long lifetime of responsible management without quite enough capital behind them. He was not in dire straits. He was in the particular genteel strain that does not show on the outside and is felt everywhere on the inside. He needed the Ashvale coal lands. He knew it. His solicitors knew it, and he had agreed to the codicil's terms, not because he was in any way eager to marry a woman he had never met, but because he was a man who understood obligations and intended to meet them honestly. He arrived in the village of Ashvale the morning before his formal appointment, dressed without his title, and travelling under his family name alone, which gave him the particular anonymity of a gentleman of no special consequence in a village that had no reason to look for one. He told himself he had come early to walk the property lines. That was true. It was not the whole truth. The mill house found him first. He had ridden out to the eastern edge of the Fenwick lands with a survey map he was studying, and he heard, carried clearly across the cool morning air, the sound of someone explaining long division to a child, who was evidently finding it an affront to personal dignity. He stopped his horse. Through the mill house window across the yard, he could see a woman seated at a long table with 4 children of varying ages arranged around her. She had a face of clean, decided lines, and the manner of someone who had made peace long ago with the fact that the work in front of her was more interesting than the impression she was making. She did not perform for the children. She simply taught them, with a directness and a patience and an occasional dry humor he could hear in fragments across the yard. And the children, who were at the age when children are least inclined to be taught anything, were listening. A boy of perhaps 10 came out the mill house door, noticed Weston's horse, and walked over with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to be impressed by horses. "Are you lost?" the boy asked. "Possibly," Weston said. "Who is that in the mill house?" "Miss Fenwick," the boy said with the particular simplicity of someone stating an obvious fact. "She comes Tuesdays, even when it rains. Last February it snowed and she still came." He paused. "My mother says she's the only reason any of us know how numbers work." Weston thanked the boy and rode on. He thought about it for the rest of the morning. That evening, he had taken a quiet table in the village inn's small dining room when he heard 2 women's voices from the garden outside the open window. He recognized, from the fragments that reached him, that they were sisters. He recognized, a moment later, from the quality of the silence between their sentences, that this was not the first time they had had this particular argument. "You have to let me lead tomorrow," the younger voice said, bright, assured, accustomed to being listened to. "You always say the exact thing that makes a man feel he is being evaluated for a position rather than charmed. Let me handle the conversation and you can manage the rest afterward. It is a sound division of labor, Clara. Play to your strengths." "My strengths," the older voice said, quieter and steadier, "are not the same as my worth, Diana. I wish you would stop making that substitution." "Nobody is substituting anything. I am simply saying that you are not made for this kind of occasion. He is a Viscount with 3 estates. You will spend the whole dinner worrying about the drainage problem on the North Field, and he will spend it wondering why he made the trip." A brief silence. Then, "A position can be bought, Diana. A person has to be earned. They are not the same transaction, and I wish you would stop treating them as though they were." Diana said something Weston could not quite make out. Something light and dismissive that suggested the argument was not new enough to trouble her. Clara did not answer. The garden went quiet. Weston sat alone at his table for a considerable time after, with a glass of wine he was not drinking, understanding that he had come to this village to see the property, and had somehow, without quite deciding to, also seen something else entirely. He presented himself at Ashvale the following morning at the appointed hour, in his carriage, under his title, exactly as courtesy required. The household assembled in the entrance hall. Sir Reginald, perspiring in a coat that had been brushed to within an inch of its life. Lady Fenwick, twisting her rings, Diana, in a gown the colour of spring water, standing slightly forward of the group with a smile so precisely calibrated it might have been a piece of architecture, and behind her, half a step to the left, in a dress of dark grey wool that she had chosen for no reason other than that it was sensible, and she had not expected to matter. Clara Fenwick, carrying nothing, expecting nothing, the quiet person who had ordered the linens, and arranged the kitchen scene to the guest rooms, and would now, apparently, watch someone else collect the reward for all of it. Weston stepped down from his carriage. He greeted Sir Reginald with the brief courtesy of a man whose time is limited and whose patience is real. He inclined his head to Lady Fenwick. He received Diana's brilliant smile with a politeness that she found, with a small flutter of something she could not name, considerably harder to read than she had anticipated, and then he did the thing that no one in that hallway had been expecting. He looked past Diana entirely, and addressed himself, without hesitation, to the woman in the grey wool dress standing behind her. Miss Clara Fenwick, not a question. Clara, who had genuinely not prepared herself to be spoken to, met his gaze with a composure that cost her rather more than it appeared to. "I have reviewed my uncle's codicil with my solicitors," Weston said, and his voice, though quiet, carried to every person in that still entrance hall. "The document names you specifically, Miss Fenwick, not as the elder daughter in general terms, but by your Christian name, as the person known to my uncle through the charitable work you have conducted at the Ashvale Mill School for the past 6 years. The codicil is not ambiguous. It names you. I thought it proper that this should be said plainly, in this room, before your family, so that no one present should be in any doubt about what the terms of the arrangement require." The silence that followed had a texture I have come to know, well across many years of sitting beside this fire, the particular dense, airless silence of a room full of people who believed they understood the shape of things, discovering, all at once, that they were comprehensively wrong. Sir Reginald's face moved through several colours before settling on a grey that suggested the codicil he had read was, at this particular moment, reassembling itself in his memory with a clarity it had previously lacked. Diana stood very still. The architectural smile had not fallen. It had simply frozen in place, held up by the last of her composure, while the whole comfortable structure of her expectations came quietly down around it. And Clara Fenwick looked at the Viscount of Blackmore, standing in her own front hall, with the weight of his intention and his own careful decision plainly visible in his face, and understood, in a single suspended and rather dizzying moment, that the name in the codicil was not a clerical coincidence. "You knew," she said, low enough that only he could hear it. "Before you came, you already knew which of us the document named." "I knew which of you my uncle had named," Weston said, just as quietly. "I did not know until yesterday which of you I wished to ask. Those turned out to be the same woman. But I want you to understand that if they had not been, I would have told you so honestly, and found another way to meet the legal terms, without asking you to accept something you were not chosen for." He requested a private audience that same afternoon, in the estate office where Clara had spent 6 years with no company but the account ledgers. He sat across from her at the table she knew better than any other surface in the house, and he told her the truth, all of it, the encumbered estates, the coal lands, and what they meant for the income of 300 tenant families at Blackmore. The way his uncle had come to know her name through years of correspondence about the mill school. Letters the old man had kept, apparently, in a dedicated folder in his study until the end of his life, and what Weston himself had seen, standing outside the mill house window on a Tuesday morning. "Every one of those children listened to you," he said, "not because they had to, because you made it worth their while. And a boy told me without prompting that you came every week, even in the snow. I have spent 34 years surrounded by people who do the minimum the occasion requires, I found I could not stop thinking about what it looked like to watch someone do considerably more than that, simply because it needed doing. He told her what he had heard. The garden, the voices, a position can be bought, a person has to be earned. I am offering you a house that is very well appointed, he said, and has not, to my knowledge, had anyone in it who believed a person had to be earned rather than purchased. I would like to change that. I am not certain I know how, but I am certain I would rather attempt it with you than with anyone I have encountered in a very long time. Clara was quiet for a moment that felt, on her side of the table, considerably longer than it was. You listened to a private conversation in a garden, she said finally, and made a judgment about two women neither of whom knew they were being observed. I want you to know that I am not entirely at ease with that, however the outcome appears from where I am currently sitting. You should not be entirely at ease with it, he said. I am not either. Now that I am saying it aloud across a table, rather than inside the flattering privacy of my own conscience, I can only tell you that I had no other way to know the truth of either of you that was not a performance prepared for my benefit. I will not defend the method. I will only tell you what it showed me. She asked him then, and I admire her for it, because it was the harder question, and she asked it anyway. And if it had been Diana's voice saying what you heard, if I had been the one talking about buying positions and choosing houses for the view, then I would have honored the codicil regardless, he said, without hesitation. The document names you, and I am not in a position to ignore it, and the Blackmore tenants cannot afford my principles, but I would have come to this conversation expecting nothing and hoping for less. As it stands, he paused, I am hoping for considerably more than I came here intending to ask for. Clara asked for 2 days. Weston agreed without hesitation, because he understood at once that a woman who asked for 2 days before accepting a Viscount was a considerably more serious person than one who required 2 seconds. He spent those 2 days at the village inn, attempting to read, and finding that he was more anxious about her answer than he had been about any estate matter in the preceding 3 years. She came to him on the morning of the 3rd day, crossing the village square in the same grey wool dress she had worn to stand behind her sister in the entrance hall, or alone, without any of the careful preparation an occasion might have seemed to warrant. She sat down across from him in the inn's small private parlour and said, I have thought about it, and I have something to tell you before I give you my answer, because I think you deserve an honest accounting of what you are actually asking for. I am not the woman who made a graceful argument in a garden about worth and transactions. That was a tired woman, losing a familiar argument for the 100th time, saying something true because she had run out of diplomatic ways to say the easier thing. I am 28 years old. I have managed this household and this estate and that school for 6 years, and I have done all of it without once being asked how I was managing, or whether I was well, or what I might have wanted for myself, if anyone had thought to ask. She paused, and he could see the particular effort it cost her to continue. I am not serene. I am exhausted, and I am considerably more frightened of spending the rest of my life alone in that estate office than I generally allow myself to think about. I would like not to be alone, and the unmistakable air of a woman. Rather'd like to be somewhere, a psalm rather than a responsibility I have been assigned to keep running. But I would like you to know that before you offer it to me, so that you are choosing me as I actually am. Tired and occasionally sharp and very much in the habit of noticing what everyone else in the room has missed. And not as the version you may have constructed from an overheard sentence and a Tuesday morning at a mill house window. Weston looked at her for a long moment, and something in his usually careful, reserved face gave way entirely. I did not fall in love with a composed woman making elegant arguments, he said. I fell, or began to, with a woman who taught long division to 4 children on a Tuesday in February and made it worth their while, and who told her sister, in a voice that sounded considerably less like wisdom and more like someone who has said the same true thing too many times to the same person who never listens, that a person has to be earned. I don't want serene Miss Fenwick. I want someone who notices what everyone else has missed. I have been the person everyone else missed for 34 years, and I have been told it requires a particular kind of attention to find. I would very much like to stop being overlooked alongside someone who is also overlooked, and see what we might manage to notice together. Clara Fenwick, who had spent 28 years being the house that held the family up, and the wall nobody looked at, and the Tuesday presence everyone relied on, and no one particularly saw, looked at the first man who had ever troubled to come around to her side of the wall and say plainly what he found there, and said yes. Not because she had been waiting. Although she had been, longer than she cared to admit, in the quiet, private way of people who have learned to want things without expecting them. And not because the title or the end of the estate office evenings made the saying easy, though none of those things hurt. She said yes, because he had told her the truth about his own encumbered estates and his own imperfect methods, and had then sat across from her and asked her to be imperfect back. And she found, turning it over in the clear, tired, occasionally quite sharp mind she had just so honestly described, that imperfect honesty offered freely was worth considerably more than any amount of polished performance offered for an audience. Diana took the news better than anyone had predicted, once the initial shock moved through her like weather. I want to say that plainly, because I have not made her a villain in this story, and I do not intend for the ending to treat her as one. She was hurt, genuinely and deeply, in the particular way of a young woman who has been taught from earliest memory that her face is her primary currency, discovering that the wealthiest buyer in the room had chosen a different kind of value entirely. She cried, in the privacy of her own room, for the better part of 2 days. And Clara sat with her for a good portion of it, which I think tells you something important about the kind of woman Clara actually was. But Diana was not, at her center, a foolish or a cruel girl. She was a frightened girl who had been handed a very narrow education about her own worth and had done her best with what she was given. And once the tears were finished, she discovered in herself a resilience she had not known was there. She married the following spring, a cheerful, talkative naval captain from the neighboring county, who found her beautiful and also found her, to his genuine delight, rather funnier than she had ever been encouraged to be. In that marriage, I am told, she was considerably happier than any arrangement with a reserved and obligation-laden Viscount could have made her. Some people are better matched to captains than to Viscounts. There is no shame in it, and it is not a consolation prize. It is simply the truth about temperament. And that, my dear friends, is where I leave them. A Viscount who came to inspect a property and found something he had not known he was looking for, and the load-bearing wall who spent 28 years holding up a household that never once thought to ask how the wall was doing, until a stranger rode past a mill-house window on a Tuesday morning and stopped his horse and looked and saw. If you ask me what this story is truly about, I will tell you it is about the quiet, ordinary, daily injustice of being sorted into a category before anyone has troubled to look closely at you. Sir Reginald Fenwick had 2 daughters. He had decided, years before any Viscount wrote any letter, which one was the valuable one and which one was the useful one, and he had built his entire plan for his household's rescue on that easy, unexamined sorting, never once pausing to consider whether the daughter he had filed away as capable but unremarkable might be, in the ways that actually mattered, the ways that an old earl had noticed through years of correspondence, and a stranger had noticed in 30 minutes at a mill-house window. The finer one of the two. It took someone with no reason to see past the filing system to see past it. Be careful, my dears, how you sort the people closest to you. The one you have quietly assigned to the category of useful but invisible may simply be extraordinary in ways your own long proximity has made you stop noticing. You stopped looking because they were always there. A stranger comes in fresh and sees in half an hour what you have missed across a decade of ordinary mornings. If you have been sitting with me a while tonight, and find yourself wanting more of this, more of the fire and the old stories and the ending that is, however complicated the road, genuinely earned, the subscription button is just below this video. It costs you nothing, and it means more to me than I know how to say from this side of the flame. You have sat with me tonight through a codicil read without seeing, and a mill-house window on a Tuesday, and a garden conversation that changed the shape of one man's intentions entirely. I would not have told it without you at the other end. Come back to Moonlight at Marlowe, where the evenings are long and the fire is always lit, and every love that matters has been, in one way or another, earned. Good night. And if you find yourself wondering before you sleep whether there is someone in your own life you have quietly filed away as merely useful, look again, won't you? The one who shows up every Tuesday, even in the snow, has been worth the looking this whole time. You simply have not turned around yet.